Okay, so I made the real hatch, and I did everything pretty much the same as before, so I won't bore you with any footage of that. The result is as good, if not better, as before. Fits nicely. A little bit looser this time, and I think that's possibly because it's like a larger radius curve. The only thing I did differently was that instead of using microspheres for the channel filling, I used some microfibers. This is the West System stuff as well. And the idea with this, as I mentioned earlier, is that it should be more durable, and when you take the hatch off and on all the time, it's not going to wear away so quickly. And the result, this is microspheres, and this is the microfiber. It seems to, it's a little bit easier to spread, I found, but it could be just luck in the way that I got the proportion of resin and fibers exactly right this time. So anyway, it turned out quite easy to use, and it does already feel substantially more durable. And I've put a bit on here so I could just sand it to see what it sounds like. I haven't sanded this one yet. It looks pretty nice actually. I could probably just leave it like that, but I put a couple of fiberglass layers on top with the intention of sanding down to make it look like this nice sort of hologrammy effect, so that's what I will do. Next step is to get this out of here, but I can't use acetone. I can't just pour some acetone in here because I want to keep the foam from this point backwards, mostly from about here backwards, so I'm going to have to just manually gouge out the foam here and then carefully make sure that the acetone only goes forwards of that point. Okay, so that's how the hatch turned out after some sanding and a bit of clear coat. It seems to have regained most of that hologrammy kind of sheen that I was trying to get. It was actually better before I put the second coat on, because I put one coat on and it wouldn't fill in. There were like little dimply bits in there. So I thought maybe if I sanded it and gave it another coat it would be better, but it ended up being a little bit sort of orange peely looking. You probably can't see it in the camera though. But that's okay for me. I'm just going to leave it there. Somehow I don't think Mike Patey would be very impressed though, but that's okay. He's not going to find out. And in here we have hollowed that out, and we now have access to the tail boom tunnel for the servos. And we're making a start on the wings here. Now this was originally going to be a 1.6 meter plane, and this bit in the middle here is 40 centimeters, so 20 centimeters out to here to there. And this is going to be permanently attached to the fuselage. And then that bit out here from here to the end was going to be the rest of the wing, and that would be 1.6 meters. But somewhere along the way I made a mistake and I cut another section like this with the profiles the same on each end, which I wasn't supposed to do. So I thought what I'd do is make the 1.6 meter plane, and then I'd come back later and make a 2.2 meter version of it by sticking this onto that. But then I realized that I was just going to be too lazy to come back and change it, so I thought I'd just go for the 2.2 meter plane straight away, and it's pretty big, and with a little bit of dihedral like that, I think it's going to look pretty nice. So this dihedral is a first for me. Is it dihedral if it's like flat in the middle and then comes out here? Or is that polyhedral? Or like, I thought dihedral tends to mean if it starts from here it's already at an angle. Anyway, whatever it is. So I haven't tried this before, but what I'm going to do is I have a piece of wood in there that I cut to the right 6-degree angle like that, and I have another piece of stuff under here which is just in the right place to hold it at 6 degrees. I haven't glued anything together yet. I'm just sort of putting it here to show you like this. And we have a channel in there for the spars, which is going to come up to about there. There's not going to be any spar in this outer section. I've discovered that as long as there's not a huge amount of load on this outer tip here, it's plenty fine just to have the fiberglass over the foam, and that's it. But since I have quite a bit of that carbon toe now, and I've realized that it sits down extremely flat against the surface, I'm probably going to be using quite a bit of that. Maybe in that crisscrossy pattern that you see on gliders sometimes, like that. Might give that a try. And the spar is 8mm and then 6mm going into that. So it's going to be pretty light build. Just at a rough tally of the weights, it looks like it's heading for about 600 grams all up flying weight, and that's with a 2S 18650 cell battery pack. Here's the horizontal stabilizer that I want to use for this plane. And just in case I didn't mention earlier in the video, I actually started making a fairly different design, and I cut this airfoil and put it together, intending to use it for that. So for the plane that I'm now making, it's actually going to be a little bit small. I think it might be okay, as long as there was enough airspeed. It'd probably be just borderline big enough. But to be a bit more comfortable about it, I wanted to make it bigger. And I thought about putting a little bit of balsa on the end here, but it was going to have to be sort of paper thin by the time I sanded it out, because it's already almost no thickness at the end. So what I'm going to do instead, and I think it's probably a little bit more efficient to, rather than make it wider, rather than make the cord deeper, it's more efficient to have it wider. So I'm going to glue a little bit of foam on the end like that, and just sand, obviously cut it smaller, and just manually sand it down so that it goes out to there, maybe about there, and we'll get another 4 centimeters on each side, and then I'll be a little bit happier about the area of the elevator. Okay, that's the horizontal stabilizer ready to be fiberglassed now, and it's now 50 centimeters long. That's half a meter. So I'm pretty sure that should be enough. And I'm going to try some different things to what I've done previously with this. I'm going to try using peel ply for the hinge instead of the Kevlar, because the Kevlar works nicely, but it's quite stiff and it makes the servos work a bit harder than they really should need to. And it also makes quite a big bump here that just makes it so that the surface is not really that smooth going across the hinge. So with the peel ply, you have to be a little bit more careful when you're breaking it free, of course, that you don't cut the peel ply or even really damage it or scrape it or anything. But if you're careful, it's easy enough to do, and it makes a much softer or easier to move hinge. I'll have to try and get some so that it doesn't have this red line in it, maybe. And you can't really feel any... Oh yeah, okay, I can feel just a little tiny bump there where the peel ply starts. So it's peel plying in 50 gram glass on top, just as my test piece here. And then there's this sort of a sharp ridgy bit there where the glass is kind of frayed at the edge where you break it free. But that's very small, so that's one thing I'm going to try. And as I think I've already mentioned, I have lots of this carbon toe now, so I'm going to try doing some reinforcing like this, and I come up with a way to do this. I don't want to try and do this in the same mix of epoxy as I do when I'm putting the glass over the top, because I want to take my time with it and get everything in the right position. So I'm just going to use some spray adhesive like that, and I found that if you just spray this onto a piece of paper or something and then use a little stick or a scraper to paint it on basically in the line where you want it to go, then you put the carbon toe down like that, you can actually make it so that, I don't have a brush here now, but it sticks on well enough so that I can just brush the epoxy over the top of it when I come to do the fiberglassing over the top, and it doesn't go anywhere. So it actually sits down there quite nicely, and you can really take your time and get it nice and positioned exactly where you want. And I found that even when you have 2 of these, it doesn't stick up too much, although it is starting to be now tangible to my fingertip rather than just the one. And finally, the last thing that I'm going to try that's kind of new is that I really don't like the way that when you break the hinge here, you get this massive hole on the back side of it there like that. It's just sort of a necessary evil of the way that I've done these hinges. But I thought I might try this, which is just a little bit of packing tape on the back side as a gap covering thing like that, and it's just sitting there loosely. And my hope is that it will just sort of sit against the back piece when it's in the airflow. This would be like a rudder simulation here, I suppose, but definitely on the ailerons it will sit flat because the weight of the plane is going to be supported by the wings, so the air is going to be pressing more against the wing like that rather than just sort of flowing over it as it would for if this was a rudder. So definitely on the wings that gap tape is going to sit nice and flat like that. And on the elevator I will put this gap on the top because the elevator is mostly going to be pressed down from above by the air, since it's sort of the tail's being held down by the air, right? So again, on the elevator I think this should also cover that gap quite nicely. It's nice and smooth. So that's just packing tape, 2 pieces of packing tape sort of stuck sticky sides together, and then cut off so that the sticky side's only sticky here on this part. Okay, here's the horizontal stabilizer with fiberglass on, and unfortunately I think I'm going to have to throw this away and start again. Putting this fiberglass on was actually one of the more difficult jobs, probably the most difficult job in the last year or so actually, and the reason was that there wasn't anywhere to hold it from that wasn't going to be glassed, so I tried to do the whole thing in one go, which next time I think I'll just do it half and half, so I'll actually have somewhere to hold that it's not going to be all sticky. It added 30 grams, so it went from 13 grams to 43 grams. Of course there's a little bit to be trimmed off, so it's not going to be quite that heavy, but boy, that's a lot of weight. And the reason is that there's some carbon in there, and I actually put twice as much glass on because it was such a long and thin piece. But that's not why I'm going to be throwing it away, although there is somehow got some nasty, where is it? Some nasty wrinkles in there, which I really don't like that. But the bigger problem is that if we look down from this end, we'll see that there's a huge curve in it. Now I actually saw this happening, and the reason it happened is because I put it on this piece of wood here with the plastic wrap, like that, to dry, and I noticed, oh, it's drooping down a bit. Over about an hour or so it started to droop down like that, just from gravity at the tips. And I saw it, and I thought, hey, that looks pretty cool. It'll be a nice complement. So this is this is the top of the horizontal stabilizer, and it would look like that. And that would be kind of a nice, in my mind at least, aesthetically pleasing complement to the dihedral of the wings, because this is going to be going the opposite way to the bend in the wings. Not thinking the whole time of what was going to happen when I had to cut this hinge here and get this piece at the back to bend up and down. And obviously if it's not straight, that's going to be a disaster. It's not going to bend at all, really, is it? Yes, I can now confirm that this piece is going to be completely useless. I've cut the back of the elevator out like that so that it should be able to bend, but it's just not going anywhere. Like, I could put a lot of force into it, and I can't even bend it. I thought I'd at least be able to get that done, but nope, not going to happen. So my policy in the future is to never try and fiberglass the entire surface of one piece like this. I'm going to have to leave somewhere where I can hold it or stab a spike into it to hold it while I'm working on it, and just have some way to manipulate it without it being completely covered with glue, and that will make things a lot easier. So for this one I would just maybe do it in half, and then the other half after the first lot had dried. Of course, remembering to hold it somewhere so that this trailing edge is going to be nice and straight. Wow, it is tough, at least. That's one thing that worked out quite nicely. God, it's tough. And the other problem with trying to hold it with one hand while it's all gluey where you're holding it is that you get these sort of ripples like this here. I didn't actually notice that at the time, but I think that's probably because I was holding it here with my gloved hand, of course, while I was doing that side, and I came back and checked it, but I somehow just didn't see it. It's quite tricky to see things in the light when you're doing it, and we've also ended up with a massive big bubble here, which I'm sure I could have avoided if I was just doing it with a little bit more control, with this side being dry and completely firmly holdable. Anyway, so I don't think I'm going to hot wire cut this again, mainly because the profile for this at the tail here is so small and fiddly. It was just a real pain in the butt to do the first time, so I'm not going to do that. I thought I might make this just out of balsa, because the elevator and the rudder, they don't really need to have a airfoil so much as the wing does. They can just be like a flat sheet sort of a thing. Alright, so this is going to be the new horizontal stabilizer, and it's 1/16 inch balsa. The reason I can make it so thin, by the way, is that the servo for the elevator is going to be inside the vertical stabilizer there, so this is ready to glass now. And another nice thing about doing it with just a perfectly flat sheet like this is that I can draw the design that I want in QCAD instead of having to model it in OpenVSP, and that lets me use splines so I can get an exact shape, like pretty much like that is actually what I wanted rather than what I had before. So the first step for this new horizontal stabilizer was to put some carbon tow down it lengthwise, and also a little bit of glass, you probably can't see it too well there, and then put a bunch of peel ply and breathing fabric or whatever, and squash that down because I wanted to lock in the straightness of this piece before I start doing other work on it. And I noticed that when I was trying to put the glass on this one, because it was so floppy, it was very hard to handle, and that's obviously another reason why it ended up curved. But now with this one having a bit of glass and carbon toe on both sides, it's quite stiff, so it's going to be easy to handle while I'm doing the final glass covering. And I did that on both sides, so it's just like that. Almost no unnecessary resin on there, and because of the peel play I'll have a nice surface to stick the next glass layer on. But I did that on both sides at the same time and pressed that between two pieces of wood. And the reason I did it on both sides at the same time is because I was warned when I was doing this one, well, not warned in advance unfortunately, but it was pointed out to me afterwards that if you only do the carbon and resin, or the fiberglass and resin, on one side at a time, even though you press it between two pieces of wood or whatever to keep it flat while it's curing, you still end up with a slight curve in it, which is what ended up happening with this one. Not really a big deal, but given that the whole point of doing this is to try and keep this as nice and straight as possible, I thought it would be silly not to take that kind of warning into account, and so I've done that on both sides at the same time while it was curing. And boy, is it straight now. We're not going to have that problem again. Okay, that's the horizontal stabilizer pretty much done. Man, it's so much easier to work on when it's just a flat sheet instead of more of a three-dimensional airfoil shape. I put some of this plastic stuff on top because, again, it's so easy to work with that I could just flatten it straight down and then put it between two pieces of wood with the breather cloth to sort of soften it out a bit again. And that's given me a nice smooth surface like that. Actually, not quite as smooth as it seems to be looking in the camera here. It's a bit rougher, but I shouldn't have told you that, should I? Anyway, on that side too, it's pretty nice. And it's 1 gram lighter than my original over here, so that's nice, even though the area is a little bit larger. And most importantly, it's perfectly flat this time along the trailing edge. Okay, I have the two tail pieces stuck together now, so all that's remaining for this is to attach it to the tail boom. And I've made sure to put a nice little fillet on there with a little bit of glass as well and some microspheres, because there's only about 7 centimeters of contact patch there, so that fillet's going to be quite important, I would think. These peel ply hinges, by the way, I'm really liking them. They don't feel flimsy at all. I thought that might be a problem, but they feel pretty solid and secure, and they're very easy to break open and start getting them to flex and stuff. And it's going to make the servo movement very light, like the servo doesn't have to put too much strength in it to get them to move. And this one as well. And the other thing is that unlike my test piece, which had sort of a sharp, scratchy edge along the seam here, both this hinge and the other one on here as well, they're extremely smooth. There's almost nothing to be felt there, so that's quite nice. You do, of course, get these red stripes on there, which is that's not a bad thing. Actually, I kind of like it. Yeah, and there as well. So anyway, what I'm doing now is I'm just about to put some of this filler stuff into the wings so that I can cover over these holes and these kind of rough bits here and then sand that smooth. But before I do that, I thought I might give you a look at the servo that I'm going to use here, because it's a little bit ambitious and hopefully this doesn't come back to bite me in the future, but it's a very small one. I think it's 2.7 gram servo, that one. And just for scale, that's a typical 9 gram servo there. And the reason that I'm going to try for such a small one is because I had them sort of sitting there ready to use. And also, as I said, the surfaces here become very easy to move with just the peel ply hinges instead of the Kevlar ones. So, in the aim of decreasing weight, we're going to use these on the ailerons. And although they are fairly large, they're 40 centimeters long by almost 3 centimeters deep. What I've noticed from watching various videos, and in particular my Homeslice 1 video where I put the camera on the tail so that I could see the ailerons moving in flight, ailerons don't really move that much at all. I guess you could say that for all control surfaces really. They don't really move that much. And with ailerons you've got two surfaces sharing the same job, so to speak, one on each wing. And this servo, just when I was moving it with the servo tester and sort of feeling how strong it was, I think it'll be okay, you know. I don't think it's going to struggle too much at all. It might not be a good choice if you're doing lots of acrobatic flying, but for a slow moving glider like this, probably not a big deal. So yeah, that's that's what we're going to have in the wings. Very lightweight and hopefully not going to cause any problems for me. For this connection here where the wing's going to be dismantled, I cut some little pieces of FR4 on my CRC machine, and they're going to be stuck to there just to spread that load and make sure that the spar and also these pins that are going to go in these little holes here, they don't move around. And I found some 0.5mm FR4 that I bought ages ago, and it's just one of those things that I've had sitting around and never had a use for really, but that's actually 2 pieces of that stuck together there. It's so thin, it's the perfect thing for this. And I've stuck them together on the middle with just a bit of double-sided tape like that, because what I'm going to do is glue this one to that side and then that one to that side. And then when the glue sets, I want to pull it apart where the double-sided tape is. And the point of doing it this way is that all of these holes have to be perfectly lined up, the 2 plates with each other, and then also the plates should be lined up with that one and that one on each side. And to do that, I'm going to have to glue them all at the same time, kind of thing. So hopefully this will work out nicely. So now there's a 0.5mm piece on each side. Like that, perfect. Just before sticking the tail onto the boom there, I thought I'd do a CG check, and I'm glad I did because it looks like it's going to be a bit tail heavy actually, so I'm going to have to bring the tail forward just a smidgen, maybe 7 centimeters or so. The overall weight of everything here is 433 grams at the moment, but there's no glass on the wings, and that's going to add, I'd say, about 100 grams at least. So let's say 550 grams just for the airframe, 100 grams for the battery, so that's 650. So we're already over my initial estimate of 600 grams, but probably heading for more like about 700 by the time everything's all done. This is how the tail attaches there, like that. And it's going to be permanently glued on there, and it's also going to be obviously permanently glued on there. So unlike my other planes that I've made in the past, there's no way to slide this up and down to adjust how far away the tail is from the rest of the plane. But it's probably about that far too long, so I'm just going to put this hole that much further forward and then chop that off there. Okay, I have the fiberglass on the wings now, and they turned out really quite nice, especially this one, especially on the bottom here. It's just super nice. But as is often the case when when you make a really nice solder joint and you're thinking to yourself, wow, that's too good to be true. As it turns out, as you can see, I made a bit of a mistake. I completely forgot to put the carbon toe on before the glass as I intended to do. So that's the first one I did, and then the second one. And I think the problem was that I cut all the glass for both of these, and I prepared everything for the 2 sets the day before. So I did that one, and then on the next day when I came to do this one, I had it in my head that everything was all prepared, and instead of doing my usual pause and double checking everything before I start mixing the epoxy, I just launched straight into it and completely forgot about the carbon toe, which is a bummer because I have lots of it here and I was planning to use it, of course. So what I'm going to do here, even though I really don't like to do this, is I think I'm just going to put it on top, and it's going to ruin the nice smooth finish that we've got there. But the main reason that I'm going to do this is because it's actually a 12 gram difference. So this is 150 grams, this is 138 I think it was, which is almost like a 10% difference in the weight. Quite amazing really. So I'm hoping that I can even that up a little bit. And there's also the strength issue. What I've found, this is actually probably a good thing to know about. So I am learning something by having done this mistake, and that is the fact that up to this point, there's basically no difference at all in how rigid or flexy the wings are. So from the root up to here is exactly the same. It's only after this point where things get fairly thin that I can notice a fairly significant difference in bending, like up and down like that, and just a tiny, almost imperceptible difference in twist strength. So that was something I've learned, and if I was doing this again, I think I'd probably just leave off the carbon toe. I certainly wouldn't put big pieces like that on the bottom, doesn't seem to be necessary. I might put a little bit just around here somewhere still, maybe just there. because this is going to be cut here, so it's going to be getting fairly thin at that point, and this little bit here is the only place that really has any flex up and down like that to be spoken of. So yeah, it's kind of a bummer. I'm going to have to sand along a bit like that to match it up and stick it down, and it's going to really mess it up a bit. But anyway, that's what's happening. Okay, so I stuck the carbon toe on the outside of this wing now, and it had the desired effect of making the tip super rock solid, so there's absolutely no flex at all in the right at the end there, just the same as this one. Unfortunately, it didn't add that much weight, only 6 grams, so this wing is still 6 grams heavier, which is not that great. I might end up putting a tiny little bit of weight right out on the tip of this one perhaps. Another thing I discovered, it doesn't look too bad when you just look at it like this. It's only when you look down at it like that you can see it looks a bit mucky with the shiny patches. Okay, it's time to glue these middle sections on now, and I made a little hole there for the aileron cable to go through. Can't be very big, unfortunately, because right underneath it there's the wood piece there for support, and if I go any higher it's going to be poking out above the top of the wing, so unfortunately that's about as big as I can make it. It's not much bigger than one of those servo cable connector things, and I'm just going to tack that on with Gorilla Glue to start with, and then I'm going to pack this area around the hole and probably pack the hole as well with the lightweight filler, because this can be fairly easily gouged out. And the purpose of packing it in there is so that when I come back with the epoxy and microspheres, or maybe the microfiber or something like that, to do the actual proper gluing around here, I don't want that to get into the hole. And when that's all set, I'm going to then put fiberglass over these wing sections here. Oh, actually, I'll probably do that in the same step when I'm gluing this piece on, because it'll be tacked rigids there, so it won't be wobbling around. It'll be easy to work with. Anyway, and when the fiberglass skin is on, I'm going to use my hot poker thing to poke a hole down here. I don't want to do that just yet without the fiberglass skin, because the wings are fairly thin and my poker thing might not go quite accurately. It might just start poking out the top of the wing or something. But if the fiberglass is here, hopefully that will help to sort of guide it. It won't poke through the fiberglass at least, and then I'll just have to sort of poke around and try and make that channel come through here. So I'm not too optimistic about how easy it's going to be to get these cables to go in and then come around here and poke out through the holes there. So I'm probably not going to be taking this wing on and off very often because of that reason. So I'm just putting the this lightweight filler putty in here to fill up the gaps on the top of the spar, and also to pack in here where I don't want the epoxy to go. And I just crammed lots of it down there, and fortunately it seems to be bulging out inside there. A little bit tricky to get on camera, but you can hopefully see. Yeah, well, there we go. That white bulgy bit there seems to be packing the hole quite nicely. I hope it is, because if it's not, we're going to be kind of screwed. That's the other one there. Yeah, so after that, after the glass goes on, I'll just have to pick that out with a screwdriver or something, and then hopefully we can aim the hot poker thing down and get it to come out there as well. Okay, I'm just finishing up gluing the tail onto the tail boom, and I did this in my usual method of first tacking it lightly with Gorilla Glue and then come back afterwards and use a bit of this gunk stuff there, microfibers, and then some glass over the top, because this piece here is probably going to be the weakest or the most likely to break part of the whole plane right here, because if anything manages to hit the edge of the tail here, it's going to have all this leverage right on this little bit there. So I put a little bit of carbon over it and then some glass over that, and stopped it there, of course, because that's where the servo cables go in. And then this little part here on the end of the tail, I extended that, so from here back is just the moving rudder, so it didn't really need to be here. And oh, it's taped on there now, so I can't move it, but this rudder will move away from this piece of the boom here. But I wanted to keep that there because it'll stop the rudder from getting broken when the tail strikes the ground. And I also wanted to have a little hole here on that bit there, just in case I decide to lift this up with my hexacopter to launch it. Maybe, I don't know if I'll do that, but at least I'll have the hole there. And I didn't want to have the hole here because then this string might sort of pull the rub or break the rudder a little bit. So I wanted to have the string right here back clear of the rudder, so that would be up if the hexacopter was holding it, and the nose would be facing directly towards the ground.